Morning, grace and peace. Good to be here with you. Good to be back with you today. We were all very much shocked at what happened in this year's Oscar. And I don't know if you were watching the Oscars, but I actually wasn't watching it live because we were in Europe with some friends here from church, and I saw it the next day in the morning. The scene of Will Smith slapping Chris Rock across the face on stage. It was shocking. That was shocking. We all saw this, and we all had opinions about it. I could tell you that as we were having breakfast or getting ourselves ready to leave this Airbnb that we were all staying, we all had opinions. We were asking each other, what do you think? What are your thoughts? And people were saying, well deserved. Others were saying that was shameful. And you probably had your first reactions as well. We all had an opinion because it was clear what we saw. It was not hidden. It all took place under the bright lights of Hollywood. So we all saw it. We all knew it. Now, what we don't know, what we could not see, what was happening underneath the surface. And I'm not trying to couch this to frame and to bring forth some gossip or what I think or heard or what was happening underneath the scenes. I had no idea. But what I can tell you is this, is that there's more than meets the eye. That reaction from Will Smith has roots, deep roots into his soul, to his life story, and in his heart. And what came out of something that's much more profound and much more truthful inside of himself. After all, I think what that revealed, which made me think about our own lives, is that sometimes in our darkest moments, when we are pressed, when we are pushed, when some of our life's traumas are triggered, sometimes the brightest truth comes out. It exposes us. Have you ever been through moments in life that a particular situation brought this whole different and new side of you that you had no idea? And you went home saying to yourself, I cannot believe that I responded and I reacted that way. Maybe it was in a positive way. You say, I had no idea how such kindness came out of me. I had no idea that there was so much kindness and grace inside of me. And maybe you've said, I had no idea that there was such darkness and such bottled up anger inside of me. You've seen people in moments of darkness, in moments where they were pressed or their traumas were triggered, bring out a whole new side of themselves out into the surface, because sometimes it's in the darkness where we're able to see the clearest. We've been journeying for many weeks now through the Gospel of Mark, and we're now in part 2 of the last 3 series. The first part of last 3 was focused on Jesus's last 3 years prior to his death and resurrection, and now we're focusing and honing in on the last 3 days before the resurrection. This is what part 2 is about. And we started last week with Jesus breaking bread with his disciples and celebrating the Jewish Passover. What we're going to look today at is this passage that records what happens after that meal. Jesus actually interrupts the meal with a song, and they go into this place known as the Garden of Gethsemane. And in that very moment, what we see here in the gospel accounts, we're going to read the passage in a little bit, what we see here is Jesus entering and being plunged completely into a moment of darkness in his life. Up to this point, Jesus has held it together. I mean, he was talking about his hour. It was getting darker, but here Jesus collapses. Jesus is cast into darkness. And it's in this great moment of darkness in the life of Jesus in the last 3 days prior to his death and his resurrection that we see some of the clearest truths about the Son of God. Truths that are both beautiful and comforting to us as we go through dark moments in our lives and as we face the darkness that's inside of us. So I want to invite you to read with me from the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to read in chapter 14, verses 32 through 42. And I want to ask you to pay attention to this reading. You can follow along on the screens as well. This is what the Word of God says. And they went to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter and James and John, which were the same ones, obviously, that he took up to the mountain of transfiguration. And he began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." And he came and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again, he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. My betrayer is at hand." This is the word of the Lord. In this great moment of darkness that Jesus faces in this garden, we see some of the clearest truths about our Savior. Truths, as I said, that are both beautiful and comforting to us as we go through dark moments of our lives, as we face the darkness inside of us. There are three particular things that we see here. Number one, here's the truth that he gets us. When we're going through darkness, he gets us. Here's the second truth. We find a unique way to process pain and grief. And then thirdly, we find here a courage that's large enough to face anything in life. He gets us a unique way to process pain and grief, and a courage large enough to face anything in life. Let's look at all these three things that we see in Jesus in the dark moments of the garden. Number one, we learn that he gets us. The text tells us, starts off by saying, giving us this information in verse 32, that after that meal, after breaking bread with the disciples, after actually storming the meal, he didn't even properly finish the meal. And I don't want to get into the details here, but it's in another gospel account that he sings a song and they're supposed to wrap up the meal, but he leaves before the meal is supposed to be over, according to the Jewish customs. And he storms out into the garden with the disciples, so the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is east of the city of Jerusalem. If you've ever been there, if you've been up on the mount, we almost went there this year. I'm so sorry it didn't happen. We postponed the trip for next year. But when you're in the Mount of Olives, you see this other hill. That's where the city of Jerusalem is built. It starts from the bottom and it goes all the way to the top, the city there where the mount is built, where you have the Temple Mount and the temple. But from the Mount of Olives, you have a clear picture of the city. So this is significant to me because Jesus goes to this place to pray after the meal. He actually probably comes up the mount. He probably comes out of Jerusalem, goes up the mount, and now he is praying as he has this view, this beautiful view of the gates and the walls of the city of Jerusalem. And the text tells us that while he's there in the Mount of Olives, he enters this garden by the name of Gethsemane. And this information here is intentional because there is a poetic device as Mark throws this piece of information in here, and I'll tell you why. Because Gethsemane in Aramaic means the olive press. And they say that garden's still there today. And we've been to a garden where they said, hey, this is where Gethsemane was. There's a Catholic church that's been built there. I don't know if that's the original location of it, but something similar of those sorts was where Jesus entered. And it's a smaller garden filled with really tight olive trees, all surrounding where the place that he was supposedly praying. And in that place probably had a olive press that you would use to press olives and produce olive oil, which we all love, and I can actually drink a bottle of it. Keto allows me to do that in a good day, okay? So here he is in this place. And the reason why that information is important is because Mark wants us to understand that there is a correlation between two aspects here. The external environment of where Jesus finds himself matches the condition of his internal environment, his heart and his soul. As he is in this place known as the oil press, where olives were pressed, he was being pressed, deeply pressed on the inside. And this is what we read in verse 33 all the way to 35. Hey, let's read it again, because I think it's important that you get this, that you let these words sit in. And he took with him, Jesus, Peter, James, and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. He began to feel this great distress and trouble on the inside. And then he begins to share with them. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. He takes that which is on the inside and he puts it on the outside as he shares with his disciples. And he says, remain here and watch. Be here with me. I want you to be here in this tough moment of my life with me. And verse 35, it all comes to a head. And going a little farther, he fell to the ground. He collapsed. It was so heavy. The press was so strong on his heart. The crush was so intense that he collapsed. And in the Gospel of Luke, it says that as he began to come to grips with that reality and pray, that he actually sweat blood. He collapsed. The Savior collapsed on the ground in the dirt of this garden. And the reason why that is happening is twofold. Number one, as an old preacher in the 1700s, a man by the name of Jonathan Edwards, who preached a sermon in the same passage, says, what's happening here is, I love the picture, you'll probably see this in your head. He says, the creator God of the universe, the Father takes the Son, God the Son, to the edge of the precipice. And he allows him to look down at the precipice that he is about to be plunged. And his heart sinks deep into his chest. He sees the horror of what he's about to embark. He sees it. But then secondly, it's clear here in the text why he is filled with grief is because he is God and he can read the hearts of the disciples that are around him. And he knows that the noose that's around his heart is not anywhere near their hearts. While his heart is being pressed and crushed and plunged into utter darkness, they're fine. They're okay. They're just tired. But they are detached. They are not in tune with what's going on inside of him. His best friends are not showing empathy to him. And he knows that it's not going to get better. It's actually going to get worse. He's going to be abandoned by them. In fact, just a few hours before that, on the way to the garden, he is saying to Peter, you're going to betray me 3 times. Oh, no, I am not. Are you crazy? I love you. No. That's going to happen. He knows. Doesn't it hurt when you are hurting, when you are grieving, when you are in pain, that the people around you, sometimes even your spouse, has no empathy for you, they do not understand what's going on inside of you. Your friends are clueless. You are suffering alone. It feels like you're in utter darkness, like Jesus is here in this garden. And it just increases your grief. It just increases your pain because you know that they don't care. like the disciples here, who Jesus has invited to be with him, and yet they're falling asleep on him. It's a reason for great pain. And I think that if we take some time and we reflect about what's happening, what's going on in this moment in Jesus' life, there are some deep lessons that we can draw for ourselves. The first one is, it's in his anguish, it's in his sorrows, it's in the context of his grief that Jesus acknowledges our grief as well. You know, some of the greatest pains that we will ever face in life, or that we have faced in life, is to be abandoned and to be betrayed. And some of you are here today and you carry deep wounds, you carry deep trauma for the abandonment that you have suffered in life. Some of the people that you've trusted the most have left you without even saying a word. When you look around, where are they? They're gone. They're gone. No conversations, no warrants, no nothing. They're out the door. And you're like, wait a minute, we should have talked about this. They're out. And you carry deep trauma to this day. It's why you can't trust people. It's why your heart begins to palpitate when a relationship is gaining ground and it's becoming closer and deeper and more intimate. You're like, is this gonna happen ever again? And that's why sometimes you act erratically and you slap people upside the face. It's because you have been wounded, you have trauma that has not been dealt with to this day. And some of you have been betrayed. And for some of you, it hurts more than others. I am an Enneagram 8, and you can read about that later. It's a type of profile for a personality. And to me, betrayal hurts more than sometimes other people. Loyalty is a high, high value to me. And I have been backstabbed over and over and over again. And it deeply, deeply hurts me when that happens. And I can recall of a recent experience where that has happened and that has taken place. And the comfort for this passage to me is that even though sometimes the closest people around me do not know, God acknowledges my pain. You're here today and you say, people have no clue what I'm going through. They don't know any better, but God does. And he knows your pain. He sees you right now. He sees your heart. As he saw the disciples' heart that was clueless about what was going on inside of him, with no care for what was happening to him, he sees your heart as well. And he says, I acknowledge what's happening and what's taking place inside of you. Nobody sees it, but I see it. That's what this passage is here for. And moreover, he invites you and I to grieve. Oh, I don't like to grieve because in our culture, we don't like to grieve. We like to move on from pain. We like to numb pain. We don't like to be in touch with pain. And Jesus is saying, look at me. I am not going away. I'm staying here in the garden. And I'm inviting you to see this, to be with me. You're obviously falling asleep, but I'm inviting you, and I'm going to tell you through this story that when you go through difficult moments in life, sit. Don't try to leave that space so quickly. Grieve. I grieve. You can grieve. You should grieve because I have grieved. I'm not doing anything that's unnecessary for you. If it was necessary for me, it's got to be necessary for you. Grieve. Own. Name the pain. He gives you an allowance to grieve. Moreover, in his sorrow and his pain, not only does he invite us to grieve, but he comforts us in our grief. In my moments of grief recently, like I said, I have been reminded by this passage of this, that he is saying, I get you, I understand you. The creator God of the universe, think about this, in Jesus Christ, has empathy with us. He is empathetic to your pain. Not only does he acknowledge Not only does he invite you to enter that space of grieving that's healing, but he says, I'm here with you. I want to comfort you because I know what it means to be betrayed. I know what it means to be abandoned. Have you read about the lives of the major world religion founders? How do they die? Oh, they die surrounded by their followers in peace. They live a long life. Buddha, Muhammad, they die with courage. Not Jesus. And therefore, the only reason why this is in this text is because it happened and it is true. Because if you were trying to build a winning account of the founder of your religion, you would never expose him, especially in a world that devalued, like the world back in those days, weakness of people that showed emotions and feelings. This is radical. This is unique. This is truth. This is grace. This is the creator God of the universe empathizing with us. He gets us. He gets you. Your spouse may not get you. Your closest friends may not get you, but he gets you. He's saying this through this story here today. Do you know this? Oh yeah, I know this. No. Do you know this? Because the truth of the matter is that many of us know with our heads, but you don't know with your heart. You have never sensed him showing empathy towards you, moving with vulnerability towards you. You've never experienced and sensed this. But I'm going to tell you, the moment that you do, it will transform you. It's the very definition of what it means to be in a relationship with God. So he's inviting you into that space today. He says, I get you. I see you. I'm here to comfort you. My story and your story overlap and intersect. He gets you. That's what we see in his darkest moment. But also, in his darkest moment, we see a very unique way to process pain and grief. What does Jesus do at his darkest moment? Does he lash out at people? Does he blame shift? Does he suppress what's happening? Does he come out with a stiff upper lip? Does he have a stoic approach to his pain and his suffering? Look at what verse 35 tells us. Go back to verse 35. I think this is significant. When he collapsed, right? And going a little farther, he fell on the ground. He collapses. And what? And prayed. And prayed is very important. Let me tell you about the significance of after he collapses and prayed. Let me tell you the significance of that. There's two things. There are our desires, and then there are the circumstances of life. Okay? Here's a question. What happens when our desires don't match the circumstances of life? In fact, let's turn it around. To answer this question, let's start with the previous question. What happens when our desires match the circumstances of life? I have a desire to excel in my career, and I'm getting promoted. I'm getting acknowledged for what I do. My desires are matching the circumstances of life. What happens? Happiness. Joy. What happens when you desire to go deep with somebody and that person is corresponding? When the circumstances match the desires of your heart. Joy, happiness. But what happens when our desires don't match the circumstances of life? When you want to excel in your career, but opportunities don't come up. Other people take the promotions instead of you. Other people close the deals instead of you. Grief, pain, misery. When you desire to go deep with somebody and that person is not corresponding. Deep pain and grief. Now the problem is this, is that when our desires do not match the circumstances of life, two approaches that we take that are not very healthy. The first approach is to change the circumstances. Is to say, if my desires do not match the circumstances of life, here's how I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to change the circumstances of life. I'm not being correspondent in that relationship. I'm out. I'm dropping the commitment. I don't like the neighbors that I have. I'm going to move to another neighborhood. I'm going to change the circumstances of life. I'm going to leave this boss. I'm going to get another boss. Understandable. But that's sometimes the only approach that we take to every moment of hardship in life. When the circumstances do not match our desires. I want the leaders of my church, I see this a lot. I'm going to go here, okay? I want the leaders of my church to go a particular direction. No, I'm out. I'm seeking another church. I change the circumstances. I'm leaving. That's how it happens. True? Am I lying here? Okay, good. Here's the other approach. By the way, this is what modern culture encourages us to do. Change the circumstances. Shift the circumstances. Find new circumstances. Here's the other one. This is the moralistic, religious approach. And you find this approach from Buddhism all the way to deep religious Christianity, okay? And that is, who cares about your feelings? We live by morals. We live by principles. Squash your feelings. Stay on the path, Buddhism. Stay on the path. The journey is more important than the outcome, right? The other approach is to choke our hearts. Choke your feelings. Don't let any of this out. That's going to disturb you. Live by reason. Choke your heart. Choke your feelings. Don't be vulnerable. Don't be honest. That's a sign of weakness. And here's the problem with these two approaches. You know what it is? Shallowness. That's the problem with the two. Let's say you take the first route. Let's change the circumstances. Let's mess with the circumstances, not the desires. Let's keep the desires. Let's work on the circumstances. What happens? You become a shallow person because nobody can grow, nobody can evolve, nobody can become a deeper and more robust soul unless they stay and stick through moments of hardships and work them out. I'm going to say something as well. Been married to that woman for almost 22 years. Has every moment of our lives been easy? Have we never had any conflict? No. But the best marriages that I know are the ones of people that in the hardships, they stayed and they worked through. And that's why the relationships are deep, because they did not change the circumstances. I'm not feeling love, I'm out. I'm going to find a new love and change the circumstances so I feel love again. Great. You will be a shallow person and you will attract shallow people and your life will be shallow and you will be weaker and weaker by the day. If you choose the second route, if that's your practice, if that's your modus operandus, if you are always choking your heart and choking your feelings and not being honest and vulnerable, what will happen? You will not be in touch with your feelings. You will not own your feelings. You don't want to touch them. So what's going to happen is you are going to lose empathy for people that go through pain and feel. They actually feel. They actually feel. You're going to lose empathy. And therefore, all of your relationships are going to be superficial. All of your conversations are going to be small talk. And guess what? No human being can thrive in the superficialities of relationships because we were meant for deep relationships. And you will have shallow relationships all around you and you will wither. You will not thrive. And what's interesting about Jesus is that Jesus chooses neither approach. Jesus looks at our choices, our two common choices, and says, I want none of that. What does Jesus do? What does Jesus do? Jesus, number one, owns his feelings. He shares with his disciples. This is what's happening inside of me. This is what's going on. Let me tell you. You may not want to listen, but let me tell you. He owns them. He shares. He's vulnerable. And then he redirects his feelings to God. He redirects what's inside of him to God. He doesn't dump it on people, explode on people, doesn't slap people on stage, okay? When he is pressed, he redirects it to God. You get it, why it's important that we understand? And when he collapsed and prayed, because that's what he does, and then he intensifies his prayer. Notice how there's this movement of, look, just pay attention to the text. I was reading it upside down. Okay, so verse 39, and again he went away and prayed, and again he came and found them sleeping. So he is going, checking on them, and he goes back to prayer. Checks on them, and goes back and intensifies in prayer. He intensifies his prayer life when that's happening, when that's going on. And that's why we have the Psalms in the Bible, because the Psalms provide us a third and most healthy way, unique way to process our grief and our pain and our feelings. There are accounts of people that were deeply grieving that chose to take their feelings up to God, to process them with God. And as a result, when you do that, you not only meet him, but you find healing as well. The creator God of the universe, he's inviting you to do that because he understands something about you that sometimes you forget, and that is you cannot process grief by yourself. We, the strong ones, and I have that tendency too, I think that I can process grief by myself. I don't need to share with anybody. I just can sit on my corner here, maybe read a book, put some headphones on, and I'm going to process my grief. Yes, you need to do that, but you cannot do that ultimately. You need others. Why? Because you have blind spots. You have blind spots. There are angles in your life that you can't see that others see. You need to let other people in and allow them to speak truth into you. You cannot do it by yourself. So God knows this, okay? And he's inviting you because, now listen, he is the perfect person. The only perfect person that will handle your feelings in the perfect sense, in the perfect way. I know that you are afraid because you've done that before to people, and people have stepped on your feelings. They have not paid attention. They've done to you like the disciples are doing to Jesus here in the garden. But he's saying, hey, I want to invite you to do this to me, because when you do that, there is power, there is healing. That's why the psalmist in Psalm 126, verse 5, he says that those who sow in tears will reap in abundance of joy. Think about this image of sowing, right? You don't sow, you get a cartwheel filled with seeds, and you don't go to one spot and you just dump them all, right? Yeah, that's how we deal with our tears and our feelings sometimes, right? We just dump all the seeds out. God has said, no, invest your tears. Plant your tears in my soil, one by one. It's an investment that you're making, and it's not gonna change right away, overnight, but over time. As you invest your feelings through prayer, as you intensify that activity, life is gonna come forth from it. Change and transformation is gonna take place. Healing is going to happen, which allows us to see the last truth about the Son of God on the darkness of the garden. That is the courage that's large enough to face life. After Jesus processes his feelings with the Father, what is the outcome? The last couple verses, verses 41 and 42. And he came a third time, said to them, are you still sleeping? Take your rest. It is enough. And then he says, the hour has come. And after saying the hour has come, look at what he says in verse 42. Rise. The Jesus that we see in the beginning of Gethsemane, of the accounts of the Gethsemane, is different than the Jesus that comes out of Gethsemane. The Jesus that is going into Gethsemane collapses, filled with grief. The Jesus that walks out of Gethsemane is saying, it's about time, it's game time. Steps into the cage. Time to fight. Filled with courage. And I want you to understand this, that if you do what Jesus has done over and over again, you will come out on the other side the same way as well. Because as you process the way that Jesus has processed his grief and his pain, you will realize two things. It's inevitable as you do this, that you will realize two things, or you'll be reminded of two things. Number one, you will be reminded of the Father's love for you. There's no way that you will enter a life of prayer without being reminded of the Father's love for you. At the very essence, prayer is the Father making himself available to you through the Son for communication, for exchange, for conversations in prayer, through his Holy Spirit. That's what's happening. And that's what we see here in the garden. As Jesus is praying for the disciples, we see his love being demonstrated for his disciples. You know, at first, I believe that when Jesus says to his disciples, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, I thought that he was saying, you jerks, weak jerks. Get up. What are you doing? I thought that Jesus was scolding them every time that he came back. I'm going to give you a 3 scold. Third one, you're going to have to get up. That's not what he's doing. I realize this. If you read it more carefully, you'll see this too. In fact, he says this in verse 41. Are you still sleeping, taking your rest? He acknowledges that they're tired. And he's saying to them, you know, you want to be strong, but you just can't. You're just weak. You're weak. I know you want to be strong. Look, he comes to a space that you and I have entered many times in life. We wanted to be strong, but we're just weak. It's the admission that Paul makes in Romans 7. The good that I want to do, I end up not doing, and the evil that I don't want to do, I end up doing. Oh, miserable man that I am. See, Jesus identifies with their weakness. I know you're just tired. We had a long day, and I know you want to be strong for me, but you just don't have it in you. I know. It's the same thing as if you were to ask your child, your 10-year-old, your 5-year-old to drive a car. Hey, drive me over here. You just can't. I know. You just can't. I get it. He's looking at us. He says, you want to be strong, but you just can't. But here's a way that I can make you strong. So I want you to see the grace, not just in the garden, but beyond the garden as well. And I love how in this passage here, in verse 33, it says that when he takes the disciples with him, Peter, James, and John in the garden, it says, and began to be greatly distressed. That word began is very important because it starts here, something that will continue on. The grief, the suffering, the pain starts. It begins, but it continues. It doesn't stop. It continues on. And what's happening here is that the press and the noose that's around his heart continues to tighten and tighten and tighten, all the way that it shuts down his heart. That suffocates his heart as he's on the cross. The full wrath of God is descending upon him because it should have been descending upon us that fall asleep on God all the time. The press goes to its max power and pressure on the cross so that the healing ointment of God can flow down from it and touch our wounds and heal our traumas and address us where we're at today. That's where you see grace. And it's when you see this level of love and grace in the garden and beyond the garden, into the cross, the ultimate press, that you are able to be built up in courage. The only thing that will get you into enemy's fire is love. I keep watching these images of these Ukrainian soldiers going to fight undernumbered against these Russian soldiers in their own country. Why are they doing that? It's because of love. They have a love for their country, a love for their family. That's why they're doing it, because they're defending. The only thing that will move you forward, the only courage that will get you to face any adversity in life is a courage that flows out of deep understanding of the unconditional love of God for you in Jesus Christ. If you don't know that you're loved, if you question God's love, if you doubt God's love, there are going to be moments like, I'm not sure that I can get through this because I don't have enough love in the back here pushing me forward. When you do, it keeps moving you forward. But not only that, this courage flows out of a concept and a reassurance of hope, because you know you're reassured through this story of his perfect will. In the garden, Jesus is praying and he closes his prayer, not my will, but yours be done. Is it possible that anything good is going to come out of this? When you are reminded of Jesus' prayer in the garden and what he's doing in the garden for you, you're saying yes. You can go to God and you can ask the question, will this grief ever pass? Can you take away this cup from me? And the answer is yes, absolutely yes. It will pass. It fills your heart with hope. So that when you go through dark moments again in life, and as you go through dark moments in life, and as you are pressed, the truth that comes out from inside of you is not an ugly, nasty truth, but it's beautiful and comforting, not only to you, but to those who are around you. And that is my hope and my prayer for you. If you today come and meet the Savior at his table, will you? So let's pray.